Imagine looking at your bank account and seeing a balance that barely covers your monthly mortgage, knowing that in exactly 24 hours, that number is scheduled to jump by $4 million. You have spent 5 years of your life, thousands of hours of overtime, and your entire mental well-being chasing this single moment. You have already planned the house you will buy for your parents, the college fund for your children, and the feeling of finally being free from the corporate grind. Then, with a single notification on your phone and a 3-minute meeting in a cold, glass-walled conference room, it all vanishes. Not because you failed at your job, but because you were outplayed by a single paragraph hidden on page 74 of a contract you signed half a decade ago. This is the story of how a $4 million dream turned into a legal nightmare, and why the most dangerous thing you can ever sign is a document you think you already understand. The story begins 5 years ago when I was recruited into one of the top private equity firms in the city. At the time, I felt like I had won the lottery. I was 32 years old, ambitious, and hungry for a seat at the table where real wealth was created. The offer was standard for the industry, a respectable base salary, a performance-based annual bonus, and the real prize, a significant stake in the carried interest of the fund. That carried interest was my golden ticket. It was explained to me as a long-term incentive plan that would vest over 5 years. If the fund performed well, and if I stayed until the payout date, I would receive a windfall that would change my family's legacy forever. I remember sitting in the HR office on my first day, flipping through a thick stack of paperwork. Like most people in high-pressure environments, I focused on the numbers. I saw the percentages, the vesting schedule, and the projected returns. I saw the term bad leaver, but I didn't give it much thought. In my mind, a bad leaver was someone who stole money from the company, someone who committed a crime, or someone who breached their non-compete. I was a hard worker. I was a team player. I was never going to be a bad leaver. That was my first and most expensive mistake. For the next 4 years and 11 months, I gave that firm everything. I missed my daughter's first steps because I was in London closing a deal. I spent my 10th wedding anniversary on a conference call in a hotel room in Singapore. I developed chronic back pain from the red-eye flights and high blood pressure from the constant stress of managing hundreds of millions of dollars. But I told myself it was worth it. Every time I felt like quitting, I would open my spreadsheet and look at the projected payout. $4 million. It was the light at the end of a very long, very dark tunnel. The fund was incredibly successful. We had outperformed every benchmark in the industry. By the time we reached the final year, the payout was no longer a projection, it was a certainty. The capital had been returned to the investors, the hurdles had been met, and the final distribution was scheduled for a Friday in early October. On the Monday of that final week, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. I had done it. I had survived the meat grinder, and I was about to be rewarded. On Tuesday, the atmosphere in the office shifted. It was subtle at first. My access to certain internal folders seemed to be restricted, which I chalked up to a technical glitch. My boss, a man I had worked under for half a decade and whom I considered a mentor, wouldn't look me in the eye during our morning briefing. I felt a pit in my stomach, a cold sensation that something was wrong, but I dismissed it as nerves. I was only 72 hours away from payday. What could possibly happen now? On Wednesday morning, I received a calendar invitation for a meeting at 9 a.m. on Thursday. The subject line was simply Project Update. There was no project update scheduled for that time. The meeting was in the main boardroom, and the invitees included the head of HR and the firm's general counsel. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked down the hallway. I tried to tell myself it was a formality, perhaps a final sign-off on the distribution paperwork. When I entered the room, the silence was deafening. There were no smiles. No congratulations. My boss wasn't there. Instead, there was a manila folder on the table and a coldness in the air that made the hair on my arms stand up. The HR director didn't waste time. She told me that the firm was undergoing a restructuring and that my position was being eliminated, effective immediately. I sat there, stunned. I told them there must be a mistake. I reminded them that the fund distribution was tomorrow. I told them I had spent 5 years building this. The general counsel spoke up then, his voice as sharp as a razor. He told me that my termination was being classified as a termination without cause, but under the specific terms of the partnership agreement, a termination for any reason prior to the date of distribution triggered the bad leaver clause. I felt the blood drain from my face. I asked him to repeat that. He opened the folder and pointed to a specific subclause. It stated that if an employee's service was terminated for any reason, including redundancy or termination without cause, at the sole discretion of the board before the actual transfer of funds, they would forfeit 100% of their unvested and undistributed carried interest. Because the money had not yet hit my bank account, and because I was no longer an employee as of Thursday morning, I was officially a bad leaver. The cruelty of the timing was not an accident. It was a calculated, surgical strike. By firing me 24 hours before the payout, the firm saved $4 million. That money wouldn't go back to the investors, it would be redistributed among the remaining partners. My boss, the man who had seen me sacrifice my health and my family for his success, was going to pocket a significant portion of my life's work. I walked out of that building with my personal belongings in a cardboard box, feeling like a ghost. I drove home in a daze, the city lights blurring through my windshield. I couldn't bring myself to tell my wife. How do you tell someone that the future you promised them vanished because of a technicality? How do you explain that 5 years of sacrifice resulted in nothing but a box of office supplies and a termination letter? The next few months were a descent into legal hell. I hired the best employment lawyers I could find. They reviewed the contract and their faces grew grim. They explained that while the clause was predatory and unethical, it was perfectly legal in the jurisdiction where the firm was headquartered. The bad leaver definition had been written so broadly that it essentially turned the employees into at-will servants who could be stripped of their earnings at the whim of the board. The firm had a history of doing this to high earners just before major liquidity events. It was a business model built on theft disguised as contract law. The psychological toll was even worse than the financial loss. I suffered from intense insomnia, waking up at 3 a.m. every night to reread the contract in my head, looking for a loophole I might have missed. I felt a profound sense of shame, as if I had been conned. I looked at the people I had worked with, people I had shared meals with and navigated crises with, and I realized they were all complicit. They were all waiting for their turn to profit from someone else's exit. This experience taught me a lesson that I want to share with anyone who works in a corporate environment. We are conditioned to believe that if we work hard, if we are loyal, and if we deliver results, we will be taken care of. We believe that the company is a family or a team. But in the world of high finance and corporate law, you are not a team member, you are an entry on a ledger. If the cost of keeping you is higher than the cost of replacing you, and if there is a legal way to claw back your earnings, they will do it without a second thought. The term bad leaver is designed to sound like you did something wrong. It is a linguistic trick used to justify the seizure of assets. In reality, you can be the best employee in the world and still be a bad leaver. You can be the most loyal person in the building and still be a bad leaver. All it takes is a signature on a document you didn't fully scrutinize and a company that values its bottom line over its humanity. If you are reading this and you have a bonus, a commission, or stock options waiting for you, go back and read your contract today. Don't just look at the numbers. Look at the definitions. Look at the termination clauses. Look for the phrases at the sole discretion of the board or including but not limited to. Hire your own lawyer to explain the worst-case scenario to you. Do not assume that your relationship with your boss will protect you. When $4 million is on the line, friendships don't exist. I eventually found a new path. I started my own consultancy, and I make it a point to never include predatory clauses in my contracts with my employees. I lost the $4 million, but I gained a perspective that no amount of money can buy. I learned that true wealth is not found in a bank account that can be emptied by a lawyer's pen, but in the freedom to never let someone else control your destiny again. The office tower where I used to work still stands in the center of the city, a monument of glass and steel. Sometimes I drive past it and see the lights on late at night. I know there are people in there right now, grinding away, dreaming of their own $4 million payday. I want to stop them in the lobby. I want to tell them to look at page 74. I want to tell them that the person sitting in the office next to them might be the one who signs the paper that ruins everything. Loss aversion is a powerful thing. We fear losing what we have more than we desire gaining something new. The firm used that fear against me for 5 years, keeping me tethered to a desk with the promise of a future that they never intended to let me reach. They knew that as long as I was chasing that $4 million, I wouldn't look too closely at the trap they had set. To the professionals, the lawyers, the bankers, and the entrepreneurs, your value is not determined by the clauses in your contract. Your value is in your skills, your integrity, and your ability to stand back up after being knocked down. They took my money, but they couldn't take my experience. They couldn't take my knowledge. And they certainly couldn't take the story I am telling you now. The bad lever clause is a tool of modern corporate warfare. It is designed to ensure that the house always wins. It is a reminder that in the world of big business, the game is often rigged before you even start playing. But once you know how the game works, you can choose to play differently. You can choose to protect yourself. You can choose to walk away on your own terms. My payday never came on that Friday in October. Instead of a wire transfer, I got a hard lesson in reality. But looking back, that loss was the beginning of my real education. I am no longer the man who chases golden carrots held by people who don't care if I starve. I am no longer a line item on someone else's spreadsheet. I lost $4 million in 24 hours, but I found my voice, and I found the truth about the world I was living in. Don't let your story end with a manila folder in a cold conference room. Read the fine print. Question the intentions of those in power. And never, ever forget that the most expensive thing you can ever own is a dream that someone else has the power to take away. The corporate world is full of ghosts of people who were one day away from everything. Don't become one of them. Be the person who sees the trap and walks around it. Be the person who knows their worth doesn't depend on a bad lever clause. In the end, the $4 million was just a number. The time I lost with my family, the health I sacrificed, and the stress I endured were the real costs. The money was a mirage, a flickering image designed to keep me moving through the desert. When the mirage vanished, I was left with the harsh sun and the sand, but I also found the strength to find my own way to an oasis that was real. The firm still operates today. They still recruit the brightest minds. They still promise the biggest payouts. And somewhere, in a darkened office, a lawyer is probably drafting a new version of page 74, looking for even more ways to redefine what it means to be a bad lever. But they won't do it to me again. And if you listen to this story, they won't do it to you either. The most powerful weapon you have is not your talent or your work ethic. It is your awareness. It is the ability to see the strings before they are pulled. It is the courage to say no to a deal that sounds too good to be true, because it usually is. I lost my bonus, but I saved my soul. And in the high-stakes game of life, that is the only payout that truly matters. Take a moment today to look at your own situation. Are you chasing a mirage? Is your future held in the hands of people who would fire you in a heartbeat to save $1? If the answer is yes, then you are already in danger. Don't wait until 24 hours before payday to find out. The bad lever clause is waiting for its next victim. Make sure it isn't you. I remember the drive home that Thursday evening. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the highway. I felt a strange mixture of devastation and, surprisingly, relief. The weight of the 5-year pursuit was gone. The constant anxiety of what if had been replaced by the cold reality of what is. I realized then that the $4 million had been a cage. As long as I was waiting for it, I was a prisoner to the firm's whims. By taking the money away, they had inadvertently unlocked the door. I started over. I rebuilt my career on my own terms, with my own rules. I made sure that every contract I signed from that day forward was vetted by multiple independent eyes. I learned the language of the enemy so that I could never be tricked by it again. I became an advocate for transparency in executive compensation and a critic of the predatory practices that define the dark side of the corporate world. Every year, when October rolls around, I take a day off. I don't spend it thinking about the $4 million I lost. I spend it thinking about the life I gained. I spend it with my daughter, who is now much older, and my wife, who stayed by my side through the darkest months of our lives. We don't live in the mansion I had planned to buy, but our home is filled with something far more valuable: peace of mind. The bad liver clause is a scar on my professional history, but it is also a badge of honor. It represents the moment I stopped being a victim of the corporate machine and started being the master of my own life. It is a story of loss, yes, but it is also a story of survival. And if my story can prevent even one person from falling into the same trap, then the $4 million was a price worth paying. Stay vigilant. Stay informed. And above all, stay true to yourself. The corporate world will try to define you by your output and your compliance, but you are more than a clause in a contract. You are the architect of your own future, and no bad lever clause can ever take that away from you unless you let it. Keep your eyes open, keep your head up, and never let the pursuit of a payday blind you to the reality of the people you are working for. The most important lesson I ever learned didn't come from a business school or a high-priced mentor. It came from the silence of a boardroom and the loss of a fortune. It was the lesson that changed everything.